Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Daily Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me, as he does every Friday, Alex Ooley. Alex is with the Ooley Law Offices in Indiana. Alex, thanks for coming along again this Friday, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Paul. Great to be with you.
So, one thing I think before we get going today, one thing I would like to mention is coming up tomorrow, and I'm not going to be broadcasting tomorrow, which is why I mentioned this today. Tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of the attacks of September 11th, 2001. And as you and I were talking pre-show, you'd mentioned, and this thought had never entered my head, some of the service members who died in Kabul weren't even alive when that attack happened. They were fighting because of an attack that happened before they were even born.
Yeah, it's crazy that kind of puts it in perspective about how long we've been involved in the Middle East subsequent to 9/11, and certainly gives some perspective in that regard. And obviously a shame that they passed. And events that many of us think should never have happened, but neither here nor there. We want to remember them and everyone else who has been affected since the attack, and the people who were lost during the attack, obviously.
Absolutely. I've been watching. I believe it's a History Channel that's put it together. It's on. I stream on my TV. I don't watch live TV anymore. But I think it's a History Channel put together a series about 9/11 that ties, brings back all the stuff, and you can watch it just as you were watching it, as if you were watching it live 20 years ago. And going back and reliving and mixing my own memories in from that day, boy, the memories and the emotions just come right back. It wouldn't take much for me in my current state, if I were in charge, to be pushing buttons and sending very evil missiles going out to the Middle East. I could easily see myself doing that, just because of what happened that day. Anyway, the reason we're here, well, we did have a topic to get going, and we started it last week. We got through the first 5. We're talking about Massad Ayyoub's 10 Commandments of Concealed Carry. We got through the first 5 last week. We want to go ahead and finish them up this week. I do want to remind you, everybody, you can comment. We'll get your comments in, be part of the discussion about the 10 rules or the 10 Commandments of Concealed Carry. If your comment is relevant to what we're talking about, I'll go ahead and bring it in. We'll discuss it as we go through these. But we've got the first 5 done, Alex. Let's go ahead and get into number 6.
Yeah, sounds good. And I wanted to clarify one thing I said last week. I think I said we were talking about carrying on post office property, and I think I said you couldn't carry in the building at one point, which is true, but you also cannot carry on post office or possess on post office property at all, so not even in the parking lot. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to make that correction to something I said last week. So that's important. You can't even have it in the parking lot, your firearm in the parking lot of a post office. Not just the building. With commandment number 6, concealed means concealed, and we talked about this a little bit before we went on air, Paul. I think our views have evolved somewhat in the same way. I used to be sort of an advocate of open carry, and more or less not so much for tactical reasons, but just to promote the concept of open carry and the exercise of our constitutional rights. But since then, over the years, my views have kind of evolved, and I agree with this commandment that concealed means concealed. If you're going to carry, I truly believe that you should carry concealed, because, well, for a number of reasons, but primarily because it puts you at a tactical disadvantage. Remember, like we talked about last week, you don't get to decide when you're going to be attacked. And the assailant may, especially if he's planning to attack a group, may choose to assail you first if he knows that you're armed. So I think taking a more discreet tactic and carrying concealed is much better from a tactical standpoint.
Yeah, if you, I'm going to show my age here and also my level of geekiness. If you, and I'm going to expand that to concealed means concealed also means if you go around dressed like Burt Gummer, you're not really concealed. I call them the shoot me first vests that everybody wears to the competitions. You go around wearing that day to day, that really does say, look, I'm carrying, it's just covered by this vest. I would strongly encourage you to carry something that allows you to conceal in everyday clothing that you're comfortable in wearing.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't want to look like the commando that everybody knows is carrying a firearm. You want to look like an everyday person, because that gives you an advantage. And that's not to say that I don't think we should have the right to carry openly. I think we should. I'm just from a tactical perspective, I think it's the less desirable way to carry.
For some reason, I'm not updating. 1 second here. Oh, that's why. Give me a second here.
Sure.
There we go. Now let's try that again. Send, and now I got to update your... There we go. For some reason, I've got to update your... your title got screwed up in the process here, man. And my apologies.
No worries.
That's the dangers of live video. You get sometimes mistakes are. Gerald says you scare the sheep open carrying. We mentioned that briefly before we went on the air too, and that is people get scared at their own shadows these days. But one danger you do have of somebody who is rabidly anti-gun seeing you open carrying and then swatting you, calling the police and saying, look, this guy's shooting up the Walmart. You may have never taken your weapon out of the holster, but when they get a call that you're shooting up the Walmart, they're going to send police from all over the state. And those police are going to come in, guns drawn, and I hope you live through it.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you'll inadvertently scare people that you don't intend to scare, and it's probably because they're overly sensitive, but nonetheless, you want to avoid those situations if possible. I understand the argument that, hey, by open carrying, we maybe can condition those folks to get used to the concept of open carry, but I still think that, I think that's a good idea in theory, but it still leaves you at a tactical disadvantage. So remember, I mean, we carry for personal protection. I mean, that's our first and foremost. That's our goal. So I think the tactical advantage is superior to the whatever conditioning might be going on by open carrying.
Gerald, I'm right there with you, Gerald, man. I love Hawaiian shirts, too. I got about a dozen in my closet. You'll see me wear them from time to time on the air, too.
Yeah, you were wearing one recently, I believe, Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And John Lutine says a $500 Glock to a lawful citizen is $1,500 to a criminal. I also don't wear a gold watch or jewelry. You know, I was reading a story on bearing arms. I believe Tom Knighton wrote it recently, where a guy pulled into a Walmart in a somewhat shaky neighborhood, thought, boy, this is kind of a shaky neighborhood. I'm going to reach in, I'm going to grab my gun, I'm going to carry it in with me. And he goes to reach in, and all of a sudden he's got a gun at the back of his head, and the robbers said, I'll take your gun while you're at it.
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly a target for theft, if not a target for a tool to use against you. So if you do open carry, I want to mention this while we're on the topic. If you are open carrying, please have it in a holster that has some form of retention. Because if you open carry in a holster that doesn't have some sort of retention, that firearm could easily be taken and used against you. So if you are going to open carry, use a good holster.
All right.
All right. How about
commandment
number 7? Perfect.
Yes.
All right. So maximize your firearms familiarity. So this comes in a number of forms. So a lot of people have, and I hear this all the time, brag about how many different types of guns they have. But I think the person who's familiar with the one gun that they have is far more dangerous than the person who has lots of different sorts of guns and is not familiar with any of them. So be familiar with the tool you're going to use for self-protection, and be intimately familiar with it. And that means training with it, reading the manual, practicing, training some more. So I can't emphasize training enough. So many people, we get focused, we get fixated on the equipment, but there are so many good, reliable firearms out there. Choose one, become familiar with it, and train with it. I think that's the most important point we can make in that regard.
I couldn't agree with you more. I used to have one shotgun, one rifle, and one handgun, and I got to know them. I got to know them extremely well. Now I have 2 handguns. Well, Susan has multiple handguns too, but now I personally use, I have 2 handguns, I have 2 rifles, and I still have 1 shotgun.
Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, I love guns, and I like to have lots of guns, but there's a quote, and I don't remember it precisely off the top of my head, and I don't know who to attribute it to either. Maybe somebody can chime in the comments. But it goes something like, fear not the man with many guns, fear the man with one gun who knows how to use it.
I remember that quote. I don't know who said it, but yes.
Yeah, and that's not exactly the quote, but that's the gist of it.
Absolutely. Let's see, and comments have way slowed down. So let's go ahead and move on to the next. We'll catch comments in a bit.
Sure. So commandment number 8, understand the fine points. So we talked last week about carrying lawfully, and there are lots of nuances, and every state has its own set of laws. So wherever you are, make sure you're familiar not only with whether or not you can carry in that state, but whether you can carry in particular places in that state. And some states may have different laws locally than they do statewide. So in Indiana, we have preemption. So localities can't make laws that are more restrictive than state law with respect to the exercise of your right to keep and bear arms. But some states don't have preemption, and so there may be counties or cities who have laws that are more restrictive than the state law. So you have to be familiar with the law not only of the state but also of the locality where you are, especially if you're in a state that does not have preemption. So be familiar with the fine points. Yeah,
a good example of that is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is fairly gun-friendly with the exception of Philadelphia. Outside of Philadelphia, you got pretty decent gun laws. Inside Philadelphia, just call it West Jersey.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, and I don't know a lot of people from Pennsylvania, but the hunting culture is very strong in Pennsylvania. For sure. But as we know, or as you and I know, Paul, the hunting crowd can be a little wishy-washy sometimes with respect to the right to keep and bear arms. Sometimes they say, oh, as long as it's not going to affect my hunting, then I don't care about this or that legislation or this or that gun control measure. But nonetheless, the laws in Pennsylvania are relatively gun-friendly, I think, like you said.
Yeah. Well, and there's a reason that we refer to a lot of people like that as FUDs, coming from the cartoon character Elmer Fudd, the hunter who is always hunting Bugs Bunny. Just as long as it doesn't directly affect them at that moment, they're all for it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And of course, the problem with that line of thinking is that restrictions now will ultimately lead to restrictions on their rights to hunt later. and so it's the whole slippery slope argument. The gun grabbers don't want to stop with pistol braces. They don't want to stop with so-called assault rifles. They want to come for your hunting rifles eventually.
Absolutely. I think we may trigger off a few comments with this next one.
So with commandment number 9, carry an adequate firearm. So there's age-old debates, obviously, in this realm about 9mm versus 45 or 40 caliber. But carry an adequate firearm. So that means not only caliber but also capacity. My rule of thumb is just to carry the largest firearm that I can possibly conceal and also shoot quickly and accurately. And so that's going to depend on your skill level, the clothing that you wear day to day, where you go day to day, all those sorts of considerations. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into that decision, and there is no one right or wrong answer, in my opinion. What do you think, Paul?
You're absolutely right. I will say this, the absolute minimum caliber I can recommend to somebody as a defensive caliber would be 380. Anything below that, I've not seen data where you can reliably stop with anything lower than 380. Are there stops with 22? Yes, there are. Matter of fact, there are more lethal firearms. There are more deaths from 22s than any other caliber in the United States. Why? Because there are more 22s than any other caliber in the United States. That's why there are more deaths from 22s.
Exactly. And the other thing I'd like to mention on this is with 22, I mean, not only is it probably an underpowered cartridge for self-defense, but it's a rimfire, which is not as reliable, especially in a handgun, because of the way rimfire cartridges are manufactured. So you want to choose a gun that's reliable and that has adequate stopping power, because in that moment when you're being attacked and your life is in danger, you want it to work, and you want it to operate reliably, and you want it to stop the threat. So carry, like I said earlier, carry the largest caliber that you can carry, shoot quickly and effectively, and also conceal. So that's not going to be the same answer for everybody, but I tend to agree 380 is probably the smallest caliber I would want to rely on. I personally don't carry 380 because I prefer something a little bit larger, but I don't like anything smaller in caliber than that, for sure.
I have two.
And actually, just
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I have two handguns that I use. I have a summer gun and I have a winter gun. In the summer, I wear a lot lighter clothing. I wear my Hawaiian shirts, and while they conceal a lot, they don't conceal everything. In the summer, I have a Smith & Wesson Shield in 9mm. In the winter, I go to my Glock Model 23 40 caliber, and both of those are the Shield has an 8-round capacity. The Glock has a 13-round capacity, and both of them are in common defense calibers. Get this one in here real quick. Gerald D says 10. Yeah, 10 millimeter. I'm going to tell you what, Marty Hayes of the Firearms Academy of Seattle would absolutely agree with you. Marty carries a 10 for his everyday carry. There's nothing at all wrong with it with a 10. It's the same bullet as a 45, just a lot more powder behind it.
Yeah, there's absolutely, I agree, nothing wrong at all with a 10 millimeter. It's a great round. It sometimes can be hard to find a gun that's chambered in 10 millimeter to conceal if you're not wearing larger clothing, but a great caliber. There's a somewhat funny story from near where I live. There was a domestic dispute, and two guys were fighting over a woman, and one of the guys decided he was going to go into his house and retrieve his .22 caliber firearm and bring it out and shoot the other guy. Well, he did, and he shot the guy at point blank range with a .22 in the forehead. And the police showed up, and they were looking at the guy's forehead who had been shot, and there was no penetration because the skull's pretty thick, and the bullet had just fallen on the ground right in front of him. Did little more than bruising. So that's just sort of a funny anecdote, but at the same time, I don't want to discourage people who can't operate a larger caliber firearm. There are lots of folks who we see in classes who don't have the hand strength to operate a slide on a larger caliber, sometimes even a .380. So if all you can use is a .22 because of hand strength, then by all means it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And as we know from statistics on defensive gun uses, most defensive gun uses never involve the discharge of the firearm at all. It just simply takes the display of the firearm or letting the threat know that you have a firearm. So a .22 can be effective, but if you can carry something larger than a .22, would certainly recommend that.
Absolutely. Several more and you were saying it could be hard to conceal a 10 millimeter. Well, Robert says has to be 454 Casull. That's really going to be tough to conceal. I'm telling you, man. That's going to be a big challenge. Kevin Church says I carry a 9 millimeter during the summer and a 45 in winter. And John says my new Ruger LCP Max is a 12+1 and 380 ACP. At home, 9 millimeter to 45. I got to tell you, folks, at home, my primary defensive weapon is in 223. It's my AR.
Yeah, it's hard to beat an AR for home defense.
Yeah.
I know that there may be some debate about that, too, that may ruffle some feathers, but I feel pretty strongly about that one.
My backup home defense gun is in 12 gauge. There you go. The handguns are tertiary. They're not even secondary. All right. Do we want to go ahead and get off to number 10? And this is the toughest one to follow.
Yeah, for sure. So the final commandment number 10, use common sense. And this is in all respects with regard to carrying your firearm. So what's so funny about common sense is that it doesn't seem all that common, right? You see people doing stupid things all the time. But think about what you're doing. Don't just follow some person's advice from an internet forum. Get some reputable training. And if you have a good foundation in training, a lot of times common sense can take you the rest of the way in terms of being able to carry concealed safely and in a way that would be adequate if you are faced with a deadly encounter. So, and this means in lots of respects in terms of when to use the firearm if you have to in a deadly force encounter, but also maybe where you shouldn't use it. So that's just as important as knowing when not to use it as when to use it. So I think training, like I said, is incredibly important. Masad Ayub, we talked about this a little bit last week, has a great course, Mag 40, through the Masad Ayub group. That's a great foundation, not only for handgun skills, but also for knowledge in terms of the lawful use of force and self-defense. So that's a great place to start. If you've got some local trainers who can give you a basic pistol class before you go to that, I think you can get even more out of it. So there are also lots of other reputable trainers around the country. But since we're talking about Masad Ayub's 10 Commandments, I figured it'd be good to give Mag 40 another plug.
Amen.
Paul, I know you and I have both been through that, and I think you would recommend it highly, as would I. So definitely check out Mag 40 and Masad Ayub's book, In the Gravest Extreme, as well. It's a great book.
That's one of his first, yeah. And he's got a bunch of books, but that is a particularly good one. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Robert says, speaking of bad advice, taking a double barrel shotgun and firing it into the air. Yeah, that was our current president's advice several years ago. Yeah, again, bad advice. One thing I do want to mention, you were talking about training. I've yet to meet anybody, and I'm talking even up to elderly ladies, that I cannot get to cycle a properly maintained 9mm or 380. Now, if you get an old grungy 9mm that hasn't been cleaned in a long time and is gritty, and yeah, sometimes those can get extremely hard to work. But if you know how to train them to do it, and how to explain how to do it, I found a way that most people can cycle the action of most firearms. I'm not going to say everybody, because arthritis is a pain in the backside. We're going to leave it at that.
For sure. And just one other thing too on this common sense, I want to say, carrying a firearm comes with a great amount of power, but it also comes with a great amount of responsibility, right? So that's partly why training is so important, because if you are well trained and you exercise your rights responsibly, that helps us avoid attacks on our rights. Because if everybody acts the way they should act in exercising their rights, it helps eliminate some folks from trying to take our rights away. Of course, there will always be people who want to take our freedoms away, but to the extent that we can exercise those rights more responsibly, it will help maintain our rights into the future.
Sorry, I've seen this one, and I've got to get this one in. There were actually 15 commandments from Ayub, but Paul Lathrop dropped one of the stone tablets coming down from Mount Sinai. Okay.
Yep. And one other thing too, Paul, if I mention real quickly about the smaller pocket type pistols, because we've been talking quite a bit about 380, is even if you can conceal it, a lot of times those smaller pocket type pistols are very difficult to operate. The smaller the gun, the harder it is to manipulate the controls, the harder it is to get good sight alignment and good sight picture. They're very difficult to shoot accurately sometimes. And if you are carrying in a pocket, they're incredibly difficult to draw and reholster safely, and quickly for that matter. And so pocket pistols...
The light mass they have, they've got a very large recoil impulse. Even though they take a smaller caliber, they turn more of that energy into recoil.
Yeah. So if you're considering a pocket pistol, I think they require even more training than, more of a standard size, standard capacity handgun.
Yep. Exactly. George, I absolutely agree, and he says concealed carries are actually more law-abiding than cops. I've seen that research. That was actually, and my brain just froze as I was searching for that name.
Yes. So
go ahead.
Yes. So John Lott.
Yes.
John Lott has done some research in this regard, and what he found was that law enforcement officers are by and large more law-abiding than the general population. Okay, and I don't remember the exact statistic, but it was something like 7 or 8 times more law-abiding than the general population. But then people who had a license to carry a firearm were even more likely to be law-abiding than law enforcement. So there was this gap, a pretty significant gap, between the general population and law enforcement and people who have a license to carry a firearm. So statistically, if you have a license to carry a firearm, you are more law-abiding than law enforcement.
Absolutely. We're at the bottom of the hour. We're going to go a little bit long, but I'm not going to keep you a lot longer. Matt over on Facebook wants to know, what are your thoughts on a 25, like a baby Browning? Speaking just for me, man, I've seen 22 Magnums that have done better performance than a 25, and it's still, I'm gonna lean more towards a 380 and more traditional self-defense rounds before I go to a 25. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I agree. I don't have a lot of experience with 25, but my impression has been that you're better off going with 380 or something a little more, a little larger.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are past the bottom of the hour, and so I am going to go ahead and set this one aside. Thanks again for joining us, man.
Yeah, no problem, Paul. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, if you would, that wraps it up for this week. Next week, we are going back to regular Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Central Time, Daily Bullets. Monday, Tom Knighton from the Daily Bullet is going to be from Bearing Arms is going to be joining me for the Daily Bullet. And I've got guests lined up all next week. And so Monday through Friday next week, come join me at 5 p.m. Central Time, and we'll keep doing these Daily Bullets. Thanks for watching, everybody.